I'm KVUE Political Director Ashley Goudeau. Former Assistant Attorney General for the U.S. Department of Justice Aaron Reitz wants to be the next Attorney General of Texas. He has the backing of Attorney General Ken Paxton in the race that's drawn 4 conservative Republicans. I sat down with Reitz to talk about why he thinks voters should elect him. Aaron, thank you so much for taking some time out to talk with us.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
I want you to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Well, look, I'm running for Attorney General because I think that we're in a battle for the soul of our state and our nation. I just came from the Trump administration serving in the senior ranks of the Justice Department. When President Trump brought me there, he called me a true MAGA attorney and a warrior for the Constitution because of my background leading legal troops into legal combat to deliver legal victories for Texans and for Texas. And that fighting background started all the way back. My wife and I, we were talking off camera that we're from San Antonio, spent 5 years on active duty in the United States Marine Corps as an officer deployed to Afghanistan, clerked on the Texas Supreme Court, spent several years in private practice. I was Paxton's deputy and offensive coordinator, Cruz's chief of staff, and then DOJ. And now the time has come for us to choose our chief legal officer of the state of Texas. I threw my hat in the ring last summer and we're having a tremendous time on the campaign trail.
You know, when you talk about those legal victories that you've been able to win, tell us what would you consider to be one of the top legal victories?
Well, look, I'd love to say that when I was Paxton's offensive coordinator, I was technically his deputy, but he always called me his offensive coordinator. He was the head coach, I was the offensive coordinator. I led 46 lawsuits against the 46th president, that's Joe Biden, and I won 85% of those cases. I'd say a full third of those cases were on border security and illegal immigration. What we were doing at the Texas Attorney General's office was stopping the worst excesses of what we perceived to be gross overreach and lawlessness coming from the Biden administration. So I'm particularly proud of my whole docket of issues that I led against the Biden administration on border security, election integrity, environmental regulatory issues, small business issues, vaccine mandates, just sort of administrative mandates coming down on small businesses. From my perch as Paxton's deputy, leading all those lawsuits to push back against the lawlessness was a very proud crusade of my career.
Let's talk about, because you have that experience, if you are elected Texas Attorney General, what are you doing day one?
Look, I think that my number one overarching goal is to partner with the Trump administration to advance the America First law and order agenda. We have a historic opportunity right now for the President of the United States and the Attorney General of Texas to be in perfect alignment to advance the America First law and order agenda. Look, AG's is a 4-year term, right? First 2 years is going to have President Trump in office. In the middle of that 4-year term, there's going to be a presidential election. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure a Republican wins that presidential election in 2028. If a Democrat wins, it's going to be a repeat of my tenure as Paxton's deputy, where we are going to be litigating at every level of the justice system to stop the excesses of a Democratic administration. But while I have those first 2 years, it's going to be partnering with the Trump administration to do things like secure our elections, accelerate the mass deportation of illegal aliens, stopping the encroachments of Sharia law, cracking down on the lawlessness, fraud, waste, abuse, and criminality in some of Texas's big blue cities and big blue counties. It's going to be unleashing Texas's energy sector against some of the green environmental regulations that have choked these sorts of things out. And at the end of the day, we're going to advance law and order, and we're very blessed to have President Trump in the White House to do that. Nobody better to facilitate the partnership between the Trump administration and the Texas Attorney General's office than a guy who served in the very senior ranks of President Trump's Justice Department. No one better than somebody who's already been vetted and selected by Trump, described as a true MAGA attorney and a warrior for the Constitution, than me to effectuate those things.
Let's talk about one of the things that you mentioned there, the elections. Where do you see room for, you would say, maybe improvement when it comes to elections and election integrity here in Texas?
Yeah, so one of the most powerful divisions that the Texas Attorney General has is its election integrity division. When I was Paxton's deputy, that was one of the deputies that reported to me. I'm proud to say that I ran all of our election integrity efforts under Paxton in both the 2020 cycle and in the 2022 cycle. Now, there was a Court of Criminal Appeals decision in December of 2021 that purported to strip the Attorney General a lot of those election integrity criminal law enforcement powers. The legislature in 2025 reinstated those long-standing powers. And so now the AG's office is back in a position where it's rebuilding, it's reorienting, it's re-strengthening, it's getting its staffing back. It's bringing back, because we now have this criminal law jurisdiction to go after those who would violate the Texas Election Code. And so I think by the time I inherit the keys to the Attorney General's office in January of 2027, when I'm sworn in, I think continuing that rebuilding effort is going to be mission critical. Look, it is my experience that there are election fraudsters all over the state. They are particularly concentrated in big blue cities and big blue counties whose local district attorneys, assistant district attorneys, elections administrators, county leadership, they refuse to do anything about it. And so the Attorney General is empowered to oversee all of those things, to deploy law enforcement, litigators, to ready ourselves in advance of any given election to make sure that our elections are free, fair, transparent, and secure.
And when you say that, obviously my little reporter bells start to go off, right? We've had secretary after state after secretary after state, all Republicans who have said our elections are secure, our elections are right in Texas. You know, we're not having this widespread sort of voter fraud. And when we hear that, what can you point to show examples of or evidence of that stuff happening?
Yeah, well, look, in credit to both the current and previous secretaries of state, Texas's elections are more secure than most, if not all, of the other states in the union. But that's a relative description, not an absolute description, right? Our elections are still liable to fraud, to manipulation, to construing the results, to suppressing the vote of lawful voters, to inflating the vote of unlawful voters, and so forth. It still happens in Texas. I think all anybody needs to do is refresh the press page, the news release page of the Attorney General's website every other week, in which new indictments are brought, new convictions are rendered, new settlements are negotiated, new terms of how some of these elections administrators administer their elections are brought. I think the pressing need to ensure election integrity is also why the legislature in 2025 acted so decisively to reinstate those powers into the Attorney General's office that were stripped for 4 or 5 years prior. And so, look, anybody who's telling us that election integrity or that election fraud doesn't happen in Texas is not looking at the evidence. Attorney General Paxton is at any given moment in constant litigation with those that are engaged in, illegal vote harvesting, illegal ballot stuffing, illegal management of their local polling stations. These things happen. Are we more secure than other states in the union? Sure, but that's only because we have a very aggressive and energetic and powerful Attorney General who can oversee elections in the state of Texas. And as the next Attorney General, my commitment to Texans is to guarantee free, fair, transparent, secure elections for all Texans to participate in.
You talked about another key thing that you want to do relates to the deportation of people who are in the country unlawfully. Let's talk a little bit about that. Sure. Obviously, we're seeing border crossings, those illegal border crossings, down significantly since the president went into office. What more is there to do on a statewide level? Well,
look, at the end of the day, when President Trump was sworn in as the 47th President of the United States, we saw, as you rightly pointed out, a precipitous decline in illegal border crossings. That's a tremendous victory. However, during the Biden administration, we know at least tens of millions of illegals came over. That's of what we know. We don't know the full scope of how pervasive the invasion of illegal aliens from really all over the world, but primarily coming through our southern border with Mexico, how far it went. And so Texas is ground zero for where those illegals are. Fortunately, we have state and local law enforcement that is overwhelmingly cooperative with federal immigration law enforcement so that we're able to expedite and facilitate the identification, arrest, detention, and deportation of illegal aliens. Where the Attorney General can play a mission-critical role is in bringing together, being that link between federal law enforcement and local law enforcement, primarily through a mechanism known as 287G agreements, where local law enforcement and state law enforcement can in many ways be an outgrowth of federal immigration law enforcement. Because at the end of the day, you can't have ICE agents or Border Patrol agents or Customs and Border Protection or Homeland Security law enforcement in every single nook and cranny of this state. We need to be able to partner with state and local law enforcement to help federal law enforcement facilitate the deportation. So the AG, as the Chief Legal Officer of Texas, is the one who is creating a legal environment in which these identifications, arrests, detentions, and deportations can be facilitated at the rapid rate.
I want to talk to you about some of the things that you have said that have raised some eyebrows among Texans, particularly people here in, the Austin area, Travis County, related to comments made about people on the other side of the aisle, on the left. And, you know, you may be aware there is an article out today.
Oh, is there an article? Oh, yeah.
About some comments you made about ending the left and things of that nature. What do you mean when you say stuff like that?
Look, I absolutely believe that the vanguard of the radical left, the leadership class of the Democratic Party, those public officials who proudly wear the Democratic brand and have seized the levers of governmental and official power to aggressively advance their radical left-wing agenda, I do believe that they are a threat to Texas. I think that they are a threat to our constitutional values. I think that they are a threat to the American way of life. As the next Attorney General, I will view them as such. You know, when I swore an oath to the U.S. Constitution as a brand new Marine officer many years ago, I raised my right hand and I said, I, Aaron Reitz, do solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, back then, as somebody who deployed to Afghanistan, I primarily thought about those foreign enemies to the Constitution. But the next time that I swore that oath was in the West Wing with my wife and 4 kids on my left and Attorney General Bondi on my right. And I raised my right hand and I said the exact same oath. And what I have come to believe from long-fought personal experience is that the leadership class of the Democratic Party today can rightfully be construed as enemies of the Constitution. This isn't me being hyperbolic. This isn't me being exaggerating with political rhetoric. We have seen what the left is capable of doing. We have seen what the Democratic Party is willing to push when they have the power. And I believe that what they want for this state and our nation is antithetical to our closest values, to American values, to Western civilization, and to the United States Constitution. As Attorney General, I will absolutely make sure that I use the lawful constitutional, statutory, regulatory, and administrative powers that Texans entrust me with to stop them. I don't actually believe that that's necessarily a partisan thing. I think stopping the left, the radical left, is good for all people, including my neighbors. I live in Southwest Austin, and look, I've got my neighbors and friends in our area that at our kids' sports and dance teams and so forth, that would consider themselves to be left of center. Those are not the people that I'm talking about. They've been given a choice to vote for a Republican or Democratic Party. Sadly, their Democratic Party right now is being led by radicals who need to be stopped. And so I stand by all those comments. I think that the Democratic Party in the year 2026 can rightfully be viewed as enemies of our deeply held constitutional values. And I'm not just making that up. We've seen what they're willing to do. We can look at the past decade of their conduct, and I can reasonably conclude that they must be stopped. And as Attorney General, I will stop them.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. First, do you understand that there are people who feel the exact same way about maybe the MAGA movement, or people who are ultra-conservative?
Of course, I understand that that's their position. They're free to have that position. This is politics, and
sure.
we are vying for the persuasive power to demonstrate to Americans. But look, at the end of the day, I think I would ask them to muster their evidence. I think that for the most part, the left that is screeching and calling the MAGA movement or America First Right or the Republican Party what they always do, fascists, Hitler, tyrants, and so on and so forth, it's all nonsense. It's hysteria, and it's all rhetoric. Whereas from my position on the conservative Republican right, I'm able to muster dozens of examples of law-breaking, political violence, insurrectionist conduct, obstruction of law enforcement, lies and manipulation all throughout the media, of which they control all the major levers of power. And so they can push their rhetoric if they want to. But from my position as a Republican hoping to become the next Attorney General of Texas, I can muster the evidence. As a lawyer, that's what I do. I muster the evidence. And when I point to the 50 different examples over the past 10 years of how the modern radical left, the leadership class of the Democratic Party, presents a clear and present danger to our constitutional order, to our values, to our way of life, I think we win that argument over and over again.
I think there are a lot of people in Texas who feel like they're tired of the rhetoric that comes from both sides. Is calling your fellow Americans, fellow Texans threats just because they have different political views. Do you feel like that fuels that fire?
Well, look, when I'm sworn in as the next Attorney General, I will raise my hand again like I did as a brand new lieutenant, like I did in my senior position at the DOJ. I'll raise my right hand and swear to protect and defend the Constitution, both the the United States Constitution and the Texas Constitution, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I would ask those who are skeptical of what I'm saying to please define for me what is meant by domestic enemies of the Constitution. I know that that sounds like it's inflammatory or like it's overzealous or it's hyperbolic. I don't think so at all. I think what we see now, even in Minnesota, for example, I know that that's not in Texas, but we see what the left is capable of doing and willing to do. That is a literal insurrection that is happening in Minnesota.
What happened January 6th? You use the word insurrection a lot, and so I think people go, okay, well, do you consider January 6th an insurrection?
Definitely not. But what I do believe is that the weaponized justice system in the hands of the radical left then turned what was sort of an unfortunate situation into the most widespread, worst historical example of weaponized justice that we've seen in American history. That, again, is not an exaggeration. By all modern accounts, left and right alike, that was the largest criminal law investigation in American history. More people languished in political prisons without due process, without attorneys, without even seeing the light of day. And it took President Trump being elected to office to pardon all of those innocent people who got looped into something that they didn't have any real part of. And so, no, I don't believe that January 6th was an insurrection at all. I think that what's worse about that situation is that the Democrats then won the presidency. Joe Biden was sworn in January of 2021, and then he weaponized the whole of federal government, the entirety of the Justice Department under Merrick Garland, to launch what is now one of the most shameful acts of weaponized, democratic, liberal-led weaponized justice in American history.
So what happened January 6th? So the images that we saw, the damage that was done, you know, lawmakers hiding, calling their families, all of that. What was that then if that was not?
Well, it certainly wasn't an insurrection. Whatever it was not what the left is describing it was. It was not the darkest day in American history. It was not the worst thing since 9/11. It was not a Hitlerian beer hall putsch in which, you know, the arms of government were sought to be taken over by those who were like the Proud Boys, or whatever nonsense the narrative was that was used as pretext to launch weaponized justice, to turn the entirety of the Justice Department against law-abiding Americans, many of whom were led in by Capitol Police, many of whom were encouraged by FBI plants in the crowds. And so, look, at the end of the day, I do not buy the premises of the left. I don't buy the narrative that the left has pushed. January 6th was an out-of-control situation of which maybe a tiny handful of people are liable or ought to be guilty of something, a single digits, I might argue, just to speculate here on TV. But at the end of the day, no, it is the left that provides the clearest and present danger of the threat to our constitutional order. I look at the BLM summer of 2020, I see that as an insurrection. I look at the ICE protests that are happening all over the country, I see that as an actual insurrection. I look at the governor of Minnesota who is aiding and abetting the insurrection, the anti-ICE protests, and he's literally using American Civil War language to incite ongoing violence. Thank God in Texas we have better state and local law enforcement that's been able to tamper down some of the more violent tendencies of the political left. But again, the assassination attempts against President Trump, the concealing of the Biden laptop story, the suppression or the fanning of the flames of the Russiagate narrative, the political persecutions against President Trump and all of his associates, even coming back here closer to home, the political persecutions against Ken Paxton. Here's what I know about the left, having spent my entire career in a lawfare environment. The modern leadership class of the radical left and the Democratic Party can accurately be described as enemies of the Constitution, enemies of our values, and it is fair play for me to describe them as such. And when I'm elected as the next Attorney General of Texas, I will treat them as such and do justice. That's not partisan, actually. I actually think that the threats to our Constitution, the threats to our law and order, just happen to be coming from one side and not the other. Now, obviously, justice is blind. If I have folks on the right who are breaking the law, who are thwarting the Constitution, who are shredding our values, attacking American and Texans' values, then yes, they're going to be on the other side of my law books, and we're going to bring them into court. But at the end of the day, that's not what's happening right now. This is a left-wing phenomenon. And right now, the most existential threat to our values, to our way of life, to the Constitution, to law and order, to justice, to fairness, is the political left's leadership class. And I will come after them as the next Attorney General.
And so let's talk about tangibly, what does that look like, right? Like, what does that, if you are elected, going after them, I'm assuming, we can start naming Texas Democrats who are leading, what does that actually look like?
Well, I'll give you a great example. I think that where most of the fraud, waste, abuse, criminality that is happening in Texas is in our big blue cities, in our big blue counties. Where you and I are sitting right now in Travis County, I think is a prime example of local government that has been seized by a radical vanguard class of the left and have engaged in widespread abuses of power, fraud, waste, abuse, criminality, spikes in crime, non-prosecutions. I'd love to see the county judge investigated. I'd love to see the city council investigated. I'd love to see Jose Garza removed from office. Actually, that's been one of my most long-standing campaign promises, is that within the first few months of being sworn into office, I will seek the removal of Jose Garza. Not just because I don't like him or because he's a Democrat or anything like that, but because Jose Garza represents exactly the vanguard tip of the spear of the radical left that we've been talking about, where this is a guy who is a communist, who has been put into office by a dark network, often called the Soros Network, where he's received an overwhelming majority of his campaign contributions. And he has turned the city of Austin and Travis County, where I'm raising my family, where you're raising your family, into a place that is more dangerous, that is full of more drugs, more crime, more trafficking, more violence, more theft, more fear, where people like you and I, we're just trying to raise our families. We're just trying to go to the park to have fun with our young kids, and yet we're still stuck with the ever-increasing threats of violent criminals. That is because of Jose Garza. Jose Garza swore an oath to keep our communities safe. He is bound by that oath. He is bound by the statutes and ordinances that construe how he must and is obligated to do his job as the district attorney. He has not only failed to uphold those conditions, but he has maliciously neglected, intentionally, to uphold the provisions of that oath and those ordinances and those statutes. And as a result, he has broken his oath. He has functionally abdicated his responsibility as the chief law enforcement officer in Travis County. And as the state's chief law enforcement officer, it is my responsibility to provide a level of supervision. And so within the first couple of months of my being in office, I will absolutely seek his removal from office. And I think that both Republicans and Democrats will benefit. We know that Travis County, it has more Democrats than Republicans. That's just a fact. But at the end of the day, Democrats also, my neighbors that I live next to who might be left of center who vote Democrat, they deserve safe communities. They deserve not to be accosted by a drug-addled homeless person when they're pulling up to a red light or a stop sign. They deserve to take their kids to any number of Austin's beautiful parks and not have to be subject to harassment by homeless people, by criminals. They deserve to be able to walk along Town Lake at night without being worried about getting shanked or raped or accosted or harassed. That's what they deserve, Democrats and Republicans alike. And it's my job to go after the liberals who have created an environment in which that can't happen.
And what about the voters, right, who voted? He had some would say, he had a primary opponent whom he defeated if folks wanted to go in a different direction, and people overwhelmingly ended up electing him. What do you say to those voters?
Well, I think that voters are voting under the assumption that the person they're selecting is going to uphold their promises, that he is going to uphold his oath of office, that he is going to be bound by the statutes and ordinances that dictate the terms of what he may or may not do as district attorney. And so Jose Garza, which is typical of the radical left, has lied to the public, has lied to the voters about what he is going to do. And as soon as he's then sworn in and has the reins of power in his hands, then he is construing and steering his office in a way that is terrible for Texans, it's terrible for Central Texas, it's terrible for the Capital District. And as Attorney General, I'm going to crack down on it.
Before you can start that crackdown, you've got to win this election first. You are facing 3 also well-known Republicans in this race. Talk to me about what makes you stand out.
I think what makes me stand out is my record. Litigating, investigating, suing, defending, and appealing on all of the major issues that Texans care about. whether it's election integrity, border security, Second Amendment issues, pro-life issues, pro-family issues, pro-faith, environment and the regulatory environment, small businesses, cracking down on lawlessness, fraud, waste, abuse, protecting consumers, protecting kids and families against the predations of big tech, big pharma, big banks. All these sorts of threats that I view as threats to our Constitution, threats to our values, threats to Texas as a state, threats to Texans' constitutional rights. I have gone to war to protect Texans, and I've won at every level of the justice system. My opponents may have been politicians for longer than I have, but they don't have a record. Remember, I'm running against 3 legislators, not lawyers. These are people who have spent their time, deal making in their various chambers in the House or the Senate and so forth. But what they haven't done is what I've done. Led legal troops into legal combat to deliver legal victories. It's that record that empowered Ken Paxton to endorse me as his successor for the next Attorney General. And when Paxton endorsed me as the next AG, he said Aaron Reitz is the only qualified candidate in this race. He's known all 3 of my opponents for decades, longer than me in some cases. And yet he said Aaron Reitz is the only qualified candidate in the race. It's also that same record that gave President Trump confidence to bring me into the very senior ranks of the Justice Department, specifically citing my record going to war against the Biden administration and winning, and specifically calling me a true MAGA attorney and a warrior for the Constitution. That's the biggest thing that separates me from my opponents. Everyone is going to talk. It's campaign season. They're going to give their lines. They're going to say what they're going to do. Some people are going to like it. You have to hope and pray that they're going to do what they say they're going to do because they don't have a record doing it. Whereas with me, you only have to look at my battle scars and the medals that I've won in legal combat to give voters absolute confidence that I'm going to do exactly what I'm promising and committing to do on the campaign trail.
Now, I do have to stop you. While they are not lawyers currently, they all are attorneys. They they all have records. I mean, you have a judge, Congressman Chip Roy was also in the Attorney General's office.
Yeah, and he did such a disastrous job that Paxton fired him in 2016. And in Chip Roy's bitterness, he spent the next several years trying to take out Paxton. Remember, Chip Roy was the first elected official in America to call for Paxton to be removed from office in October of 2020. He was then the leading national cheerleader for Paxton to be impeached and then convicted in the House and the Senate in 2023. And so Chip Roy has a deep infection of Trump and Paxton derangement syndrome that I think is utterly disqualifying for him. Yes, I have another opponent, Joan, who was a local prosecutor in Harris County
and a judge
40 years ago and was a judge over 20 years ago. And since getting elected to the Senate, by her own admission, hasn't practiced law since then. And so I respect the work that she did as a local Harris County judge and a local prosecutor decades ago. I respect that. However, Joan has not done a single thing in recent memory that is in any way, shape, or form related to the role of the Attorney General. The Attorney General is a civil, legal warrior. Joan was a local criminal lawyer, judge, and prosecutor decades ago. Those responsibilities, even if they were more contemporaneous, have nothing to do with the Attorney General's office, let alone the fact that she is consistently rated as one of the most liberal Republicans in the Senate, which is going to be utterly disqualifying among Republican primary voters. And let's not forget May's middleweight, my last opponent. Okay, this is a guy who graduated from law school 16 years ago and immediately inherited his dad's oil company. He's never practiced law a day in his life. No appeals, no petitions, no motions, no rehearings, no court time, no appellate time, no investigations led, no legal troops managed, nothing. Just the heir to a family oil company who happened to go to law school 16 years ago and has used his inherited wealth to bankroll all of Paxton's enemies. He spent nearly $1 million on Paxton's primary challengers, the House impeachment managers, single largest common donor to the House Republicans who voted to impeach. On day one of the sham Senate trial in September of 2023, he sided with the Democrats on voting no on the motion to dismiss. Remember this, we have to go all the way back in time. It feels like ancient history. On day one, the Senate was presented with an option. This is a sham trial. It's based on unsworn and unverified evidence, therefore no evidence at all. Why are we even here? Let's go home. A dozen of the conservative Republican senators agreed with that and said, yes on the motion to dismiss, let's all go home. The Democrats and a minority of Republicans voted no, Why? Because they wanted to drag Paxton through the humiliation ritual of having to go through the sham trial. On top of all that, for the next 2 or 3 weeks while the trial was unfolding, all contemporaneous news outlets at the time reported May's middleweight as the leading whip for a conviction. Now, I understand that on the last day of the trial, he voted to acquit. Of course he did. Like most legislators, they put their finger in the air, they see where the wind is blowing, they count the votes, and if the votes aren't there, why would you expend the political capital on a vote in which you're going to be on the losing side of things? Mays is an ambitious guy, and he wanted to preserve his political future, so he voted to acquit. It doesn't change the fact that for the years leading up to that, he expended tremendous amounts of both political and financial capital trying to destroy Paxton. So yes, in fairness to your pushback a little bit, yes, all of my opponents happen to also be licensed attorneys. But at the end of the day, I'm the only one with an actual experience, an actual record litigating, investigating, suing, defending, and appealing on all these major issues, and my opponents don't even come close.
Final thoughts for our viewers on why they should elect you this March.
Well, look, we're at a historic point now where we haven't had to choose in an open primary our Attorney General of Texas. It has been Paxton for 12 years now. Remember, he was first elected in 2014. And so for the first time in a long time, voters, and in particular Republicans, are now going to the polls of the primary election that starts tomorrow and goes through March 3rd. And they are having to choose in an open primary. Gosh, who do I want as the next chief legal officer of Texas? And I always point people to Article 4, Section 22 of the Texas Constitution, which says, quote, "The Attorney General shall represent the state in all courts and pleas." This is a legal, law enforcement, executive branch job. It is not a legislative job. And so while my opponents are out on the campaign trail touting their legislative, I worked on this bill, this amendment, I say, that's wonderful. But it's only relevant if they're applying for re-election to the legislature. What am I running on? I'm running on my years leading legal troops into legal combat to deliver legal victories for Texas and for Texans. That winning record was recognized not only by President Trump, who based that record on bringing me to the senior ranks of the United States Department of Justice, called me a warrior for the Constitution as a result of that record, but it also led Attorney General Paxton, the outgoing AG, to endorse me to succeed him, saying I was the only qualified candidate in the race. This is a serious, mission-essential legal position on behalf of the state of Texas. We do not have time, and Texas will suffer tremendously if this office gets turned over to somebody who needs on-the-job training or training wheels like all three of my opponents need. For me, I am ready on day one to fight and to win on behalf of Texas and on behalf of Texans, and that's exactly what I'm going to do when I'm elected the next Attorney General.
There are 4 Republicans running to be the next Attorney General of Texas. State Senators Joan Huffman and Mays Middleton, Congressman Chip Roy, and Aaron Reitz. Election Day is March 3rd. Vote Texas.